So my name is Boris Schadebünso. I'm editor of Bauwelt, a German magazine dealing with architecture and urban design. And we do it for a very long time, more than 100 years, and we do it very often, every 2 weeks. And we are not thinking about how architecture, or how urban design can be. We are interested in the why architecture will be. And that's why we are focused on a different context. It could be a technical context, could be a economic context, but most of the times it's a social context, and due to this we are believing the most honorable task for architects is design and creation for living places, and that's exactly what we are doing right now, and that's why I'm asking for maybe guiding this session. So where's my notice from yesterday? And I have to use my glasses. I was at the opening of the UIA, as you do as well, and I learned about its sustainability, and it's all about design of partnership of change, inclusivity, health, resilient communities, rethinking resources, and climate adaptation, and that's what I do believe it is. But from my point of view, sustainability is a little bit more, and we have to enter the next stage of sustainability. Then what we are doing here as professionals in architecture and urban design, professionals in the industry, is already set up. All the inventions, the research is almost set up, and you did, and you do, and you will doing a really great job. All architects and civil engineers will do this, and we are all clear. We all know how to run a building without energy consumption, how to build a building with very low emissions in our used materials and all these kinds of things. And what do I mean with the next stage? Tonight and tomorrow we have to attract a huge part of the society to be living sustainability, and this tackles the way they are live. And this is quite important thing right now in uncertain times like this. Uncertain times in remembering the pandemic situation, uncertain in times like economic change, in times of a war is close to our doors. Our living place, our living space will become a place, and the place is not enough. Our living place will become a home. Something like emotional fireplace, where we have security, where we have our neighborhood, where we have our family, quiet and safe, and calm and safe. And if we tackle this, we have to convince them that sustainable living is much better than the living before. Much better in terms of energy and economic terms, but better in quality. Better, for instance, as you see this building, in using daylight. Daylight is quite important for the quality of living in a place, or better in terms of neighborhood, or better in terms of this is my home and it will stay my home. It's very important that this is my home. So this is what we want to discuss right now, and we have 4 lectures. If you have in mind, we have 5 lectures, we have only 4. Kaspar Gulder-Jensen can't be with us with personal reasons, and this gives us a little bit more time to jump deep in this topic. And I don't know if you are familiar with this putting slides on the UIA interface, or so. I don't know if you... I'm not familiar as well, and I saw the slides a couple of minutes before, 2 hours before, and it's almost in one presentation, the 4 slides, 4 lectures, but it's almost more than 120 slides in this presentation, and so we need much more time as we expect we have. So this is one regulation. We have to hurry up a little bit, and that's also for me. Another one, we have a Q&A and panel discussion afterwards, but you have to use a microphone provided by the ladies in the blue shirt, because we recorded all these sessions, and another reason nobody can hear your speech or your question or your remarks if you don't use it. But anyway, it takes a little bit more time to have this panel discussion before we have 4 lectures, and the opening lecture will be given by Elisabeth Endres. Elisabeth runs the chair at the TU Braunschweig. Microphone is out, no, it's on, in the Institute of Building, Climatology and Energy of Architecture. A little bit fast, you have to pronounce it a little bit better. And I know Elisabeth a little bit better, and she is going for using low-tech in architecture in terms of sustainability, in terms of housing materials and robust and sustainable buildings. So I'm very happy you are opening this lecture series. Sorry.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thank you, Boris, for the nice introduction. Yeah, I'm very glad to be back in Copenhagen because I lived here for half a year and was able to have research at Lyngby at DTU Copenhagen. So it's like a bit coming home after the pandemic, and it's very nice to be in this beautiful city and meeting all these friendly people here. Thank you, Lone, for being back, and we know a long time from the Active House Alliance, or Aktiv Haus e.V. in German, and it's good to be here. And I think we started to discuss years ago about what is the challenge of architecture and where we are standing, and I think there's a lot of opportunities we have, and not just thinking of doing the same and always the same calculation, but sometimes also to reconstruct something or to rethink about what we did a lot of years. And this is a bit the dream we have in these moments to talking about architecture that can be go back to nature, but almost the reality is like this. And I think it's there are 2 points why we are still doing architecture like this. So by doing the professorships, I'm always also in the managing board of a company. This is called IB Hausladen, and we are doing, we are trying to avoid technical supply systems and having more talent of the architecture, but it's sometimes hard because there are not always high talents in the architecture. So, and robustness coming out of the plans, coming out of the floor plans, coming out of the height of the rooms and so on. And for that reason, we sometimes need technical supply, and on the other hand, we have a lot of requirements on comfort as well, what we as human beings needed. So for me, sometimes that's when we go into monitorings and we go into passive houses, for example, we always find out that a lot of people living there by 24 degrees and more and open the doors with a t-shirt. And I think that's very important nowadays also to rethink about the human requirements and to think about what is comfort really and what is a measurable comfort and what is also comfort by having a good surrounding. And what we are talking in German, it's a very from the German perspective lecture now. In Germany we have a very nice Bundesstiftung Baukultur and a nice report from the last year, and we are very considered in the moment of the building stock. Not just in the moment, I think we all knew that for long years that it is the most important thing to talk about the existing buildings, but it's sometimes very more easy to talk about new buildings. So this is perhaps why we just haven't had the perspective on it, but now they're due to reacting on the existing buildings. And as you can see, it's more than 90% existing buildings. A short part is just on the building heritage, but the others are very normal buildings, and we have no solution, I can say to you, how to deal with them. And this is in Braunschweig, where my university, or the university I'm working for, is located. This is an old commercial center with very low talents, like no daylight, no natural ventilation possibilities at the moment, and we have a lot of those buildings over at the moment, and we do not how to deal with them. So perhaps this is also the question of sustainability for the futures. What are the very robust building that can have a long duration by using as a residential building, as a commercial building, and so on. And I think we hadn't done this in the 1970s and 1980s. And the other thing is talking about the existing buildings, what is the right calculation? And we are masters in calculating in Germany, and we love to have numbers that 10 points is always better than 9 without having really the right perspective of what we are calculating. And so for me, it's always a question of the balance. And also talking about the embodied carbon footprint, talking about the talent of the buildings, talking about identity of places. And this is a place in Munich, 1970s residential building, and the question what to do with them. So you can see here is a very normal district. We have hundreds of those in Germany, and there are qualities, and we always say there's no quality, and to have a new building, it's always better. I think we have to rethink that it's not always a solution to make a new building, but also to look into these quarters. And there are different qualities. You can do a lot of transformation over there without having a new urban law. You can ask the people they are living. They are very lucky to live there. They're living for more than 40 years. But we, from the perspective of architecture and engineering, we always say, oh, they need too much energy. They are old. They have to be restored and so on. But if you talk to the people, I was sitting Sunday on the playground talking to the people, and they're very happy to live there. So it's also a quality. And when we go into these calculations and what we got out from this study, this is a long study for more than 1 year we did, is that also these always numbers to have the energy house 54, 55 means it is the best standard you can have in Germany for existing buildings after refurbishment is not the most ecological building when we do the right balancing with also looking to the embodied carbon footprint of the houses. So this is what we got out, that we are very close with all these EH 85, 85 to EH 55. So it's very close, but we are always thinking just to get these numbers, not to talk about the qualities, to talk about the urban mind of these buildings and to talk about transformations. We are in Germany very looking just to those numbers, and I think we have to look to the right numbers. And what we got also out of this in the building sector, we are not so much, the biggest points are coming out of the energy networks, and to make green networks and not to make a lot of insulation, to make a lot of transformation of the building. The highest potential is in the energy supply systems and in the energy supply network. So to getting the last efficiency numbers. And then this is what I want to bring in this discussion about the existing building. Then on the other side is what is the living place of the future in the new building. So this is a living lab we are doing together with 2 architectural offices. This is Bruno Fioretti Marquez and ZAS Architects. So Eiko Roswak is a colleague of mine in Berlin, and Piero Bruno, colleague of me in Uni Stuttgart. And we are doing this with the offices as well as with the universities. And we're very proud that we won last week the DGNB Challenge for Sustainable Research. So it's a one-to-one living lab. It's under construction at the moment. So there's one made in wood and clay, and the other one is made in bricks. Very traditional one, and we will have monitorings on the comfort, monitorings on low-tech construction, and we had 2 goals. So first goal was less technical supply system by having a high performance of the architecture, high robustness, and the other was to have just 20 square meter to 25 square meter per person, so have a very density living space and have by that good ground floor plans. And it was very hard to say we have no ventilation, no fan in this architecture, means that we have each room connected to the outside. So we need a window in each room, so also in the bathrooms. And that leads us to very different architecture and very different ground floor plans. So we have no fan, also no for humidity, you just open the windows. We have less heating systems. We are just working with clay panels on the ceilings. We made it all dynamic calculation, not the statics one by minus 12 degrees. We looked for really a good balancing in the structure, in the material, in the CO2 as well as in the heating and cooling load, and it is 100% CO2 neutral supply from the energy. But it brought us really to the highest issue was to find this ground floor plan I showed you before. What does it mean for the architecture? It also looks so normal now, but it was really hard to get these things of having no underground floor, for having storage, having a window in each flat, or in each room, and having just one apartment, 20 to 25 square meter per person. We are now with 21, very happy to get this, and we will have a monitoring to see what is happening. So this is what does it mean to make robustness in architecture? What are the impact into the ground floor plans? What are the layout of the architecture, and also how do they look like? And what are they looking at, or what is important also is talking about the aesthetics of the future of architecture, and also the role of architects. What we are discussing at the moment in Braunschweig is what is really this to be an architect, because it's about transformation, it's about working with the existing buildings. So perhaps this is not anymore a building where I put my name on because I made it in a new way. I'm the architect of the future is more like a transformer, and working with existing design. And I think that's very important to talk about that. And also, what is the aesthetic of architecture? This is a building in Hamburg. I was in the jury there for the Elbquartier. And Steidler Architects from Munich won this competition, and they won it because they came up, so it was not an anonymous one, it was like with presentations, and the architect came in with this brick, and he said it's 7 kilometers from here, and we have bricks for this volume of building for the facade system, and that is why we haven't made all the square meters you wanted to have. And this is how they came to the architecture, and that is why they brought us this brick. It's the old Holsten Brewery. This is break down in the moment, and they said, okay, we have so many bricks, but not enough to make this big house you want to have, so your house has to be a bit smaller. So, and it has a very different aesthetic, of course. You will see that it is already built, or it was already built. So this is also the question of what is the aesthetic of architecture, what is the role of architects in the future, and what is also the question of competitions, for example. So what is the jury? What is the responsibility of the jury? So Mr. Höing, the director of city development in Hamburg, we are always in charge after the decision. He took me to this one-to-one model for the facade and said, do you like it? What do you think? So it's not that we go home and say we made the first prize, so okay, I don't want to be anymore in touch with this project. So I think that's also very important to feel responsible for what you decided also in a jury. So this is my input for today, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth, for robustness in architecture, and the role of the architects in the future will be discussed all over the world right now, all over the world in our world. In the Global South, it's a completely different discussion, but that's not our turn today. Remember this picture, this opening picture, Sinus, and I can't pronounce the last name. I tried, Lynch, is the word? No, it's fine, okay. Sinus Lynch, I do it one more, is in charge for this design and for these buildings, and he is also principal and founding partner of Effect Architects, and their design approach is a little bit the awareness of what have we do to have an impact to environment that is responsible. And so I'm very happy to hear about your design ideas of this. We have seen a little bit couple of minutes ago. And he's the guy with the most huge number of slides.
So, this works. Yep, so my name is Sinus Lynge from Effect Architects. Lynch is fine. And And I was invited here to talk about our lessons on from practice on the future of sustainable housing. And at our office called Effect, we are quite obsessed with the impact or the effect of the built environment towards the surrounding environment, specifically the natural environment. But the best example that we have recently that I would like to talk about is the project called Living Places that we did in a collaboration with Velux, in a partnership with Velux and Artelia Engineers and Enemærke Petersen, which is here as part of the exhibition. Effect is a company working with both urbanism and architecture and landscape architecture, and increasingly with research and development on how we should develop. Since we are called Effect, we are quite obsessed with the impact of architecture. And what we see as a sort of really big movement that we are trying to achieve in our generation is going from this perspective of being apart from nature to being a part of nature. That has a very big impact in how we build and how we think about architecture. Architecture in many ways is the way that we shape our relation to the natural environment around us. And to do that, we developed this R&D part of our company, where we have dedicated some part of our work to asking the bigger questions and not only provide the consultancy, which is by default that you need to know the answers. We think it's quite important for our generation that we also ask the big questions. So for that, we have endeavored into a number of projects where the project that we did in collaboration with Velux is one of the sort of more fruit-bearing ones, in which we asked ourselves, can we build homes that are healthy for both people and planet? It sounds like a simple question, but it turns out that that is in fact a quite complicated thing to achieve with the building industry that we are part of. So we worked for 3 years in asking some of the deeper questions in relation to housing. Like, how do we measure if our homes are healthy for the planet? How do we measure if they are healthy for people? How can we work with principles for shared living to accommodate that our homes will make us part of communities so that we can cure the loneliness and stress which is related to the way we live? How can we build more simple to overcome the challenges of the complexity in the building industry, which is it's difficult to actually change things because of the complexity? How can we develop solutions that are adaptive both for different types of families and new types of families, but also to be adaptable for many types of urban situations? And how can we come up with solutions that are scalable, meaning affordable, so that they can scale across the market? So these were some of the bigger sort of challenges and principles that we set out to work with. But Boris asked me to show today how does sustainable architecture become livable. So I want to start with the very simple principles that we worked with to design the first prototype of Living Places. So we wanted to use the sloped roof to get a lot of daylight and natural ventilation into the buildings. Also using it in an urban scale, it's a bit slow, this one, to ensure that we get enough daylight between the buildings to support the life between buildings, both the human life but also the life of plants. So that was a very kind of simple new typology that we wanted to investigate. So the prototype that we did looks like this. It's realized here in Copenhagen, so you can go and see it. It's a small 3-story, one-family home with a big tilted roof. It's all based on bio-based materials. Here you can see the living room looking from the kitchen in, and you can see how most of the structure is based on wood, and everything almost is based on bio-based materials, except from windows and foundations, which are steel. Here you can see the window with the double high space where you get a lot of daylight in, which is also the place that you have the natural ventilation to take in fresh air into this home. This is also where you connect to the upper stories, where you have the bedrooms, This is one of the children's bedroom. This is the master bedroom under the roof. And all through the house, you can see how we have used nature-based materials and including lots of daylight and natural ventilation. This is the stair going from the kitchen and up. And this is the double high room on the second floor where you can also see the daylight coming in. This is just to walk you through the house so you get an impression of how a sustainable or more sustainable home can look. But on a more technical level, we also worked a lot to ensure that we would lower the CO2 emissions of this building as much as possible. So we benchmark against a traditional Danish type house, which have approximately 11 kilos of CO2 emissions per square meter per year. And what we found after working a lot was that we could almost take that to 1/3 of emissions, just by being clever in design, using materials that sequester more emissions than they emit, and by using sustainable energy production for this. So what we have historically been looking at when we look at energy efficiency in homes is the operational phase. That's the phase you see here, the use phase of the building. And this is the sort of traditional benchmark house. But you can also see that where you have the most emissions is actually in the production of the materials in the construction stage, and then in the end of life, where we historically have just created waste out of buildings and not reused materials. So what we did was to try to change all the components to bio-based materials. And what you can see is actually that in these materials you store more carbon than you emit throughout the entire life of the building. Only when you still, as a calculation, incinerate the building at the end of its life, it will come up and start to have a serious emissions. But it's still much lower than the benchmark house. So what we could see here that is just by looking at every building component in the construction, we can reduce the emissions for the entire house with 75%, and if you measure per square meter, it's around 66% or 2/3. And I think that's an amazing finding, which shows us that it's not rocket science we just need to go back to common sense, and we need to start designing with life cycle assessments or CO2 as a design parameter. We need to look at every component throughout the process of the building and in the operation of the building and in the afterlife of its building, and then we can get quite far. We also designed this house so it's designed for disassembly. So all parts of this building can be screwed apart and actually put into use after the life of the building. And we call that a dump house with smart appliances. So there are some smart appliances, the windows, the heatings, the heating utilities as well, but it's a quite simple structure. And we think that might be part of the solution to simplify the building so that the buildings don't turn to waste after the end of life. And that vision is now realized out here in Jernbanebyen. We invite you all to come and see it today or the next coming days and visit this place, because it's built there for us to share the solutions and for this to be shared with the world, this congress in particular. But I also want to add another perspective to the challenge of building sustainable. In this same period that we did this project, we also endeavored into asking, is this building actually within planetary boundaries? Is it actually sustainable as on an absolute term? We didn't know, so we went out and asked a number of Danish scientists if they could help us measure this. With the words of Johan Rockström, what happens in the next 10 years will likely determine the state of the planet that we hand over to future generations. So we are really busy with getting this done. So we set out to actually set some more specific targets with a number of universities supported by Realdania and the Willum Foundation. We had this paper made by the researchers that basically told us that in order to get within planetary boundaries, we need to reduce our CO2 emissions on a planetary scale with 95%. That's a lot. And if we want to stay within the 1.5 degree scenario, we need to reduce between 300, or we have a budget of overshoot of 300 to 500 gigatons or billion tons. That means we have around 6 years of business as usual before it stops. But if we can start reducing today, we can actually prolong that period a little bit. So that gives us a target of where we need to go and a timeline that we need to get it done within. And then to allocate onto how much we can use for building, we made a very simple calculation on the allocation for the global budget to the Danish according to the number of inhabitants, from the Danish national budget to how much we traditionally use for the new housing industry, 3.3% of the total budget, and we can divide that out on the 3 million square meters that we usually build for new housing. So that gives us 20 kilos of CO2 per square meter, or 0.4 kilos of CO2 per square meter per year if we want that to stretch over the 50-year calculation. So it's a quite complicated calculation, but this is how we calculate CO2 per square meter per year in accordance to the Danish LCA. So what we learned when we put this together is that if we want to be on the safe side with 83% likelihood that we support the 1.5 budget, we need to get there before 29. We can also stretch it to 32 if it's with a 67% chance, or if we can live with 50%, it's 2036. If we go beyond that, we are increasing the degrees to 1.7 or 2 degrees warming scenario. So this is much lower than the Danish building regulation, and I think in many building regulations are not even regulating the CO2 emissions. But that is probably the most important thing that we start measuring. As you can see, living places is here well located within the Paris Agreement, but still a couple of 3.38 kilos above the planetary boundary. But when we then look at the course of emissions that I just showed you before, in these next 10 to 20 years, we're still actually at a minus sequestering and binding more CO2 in this building than we are emitting. So that means that we can actually really look into, with more and more detail, into how we can use the building industry in a clever way to both minimize emissions, but also help with the buildings that we do erect to have the lowest possible emissions. And that, I think, is the main sort of message here. We need to be much more clever at understanding where do our materials come from, where are they extracted, how are they produced and transported for when we use them in this period when we call them buildings, and where do they go at the end of life, and also understanding where they come from on a sort of global and scale. And that, I think, is something that we find that we're just learning to map that out so that we can better understand the impact of what we're building. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sinus Lynch. I will learn it and so. But the study you presented in the second part of your presentation left us behind a little bit pessimistic. But I love this project because action speaks louder than word. To make a real example in the scale of 1 to 1, it's the best way to present sustainable architecture to the public and to all the people all over the URA Congress and all over Denmark. So next lecture will be given, as you can see on the slide on the screen, by Claire McManus. She is the spokeswoman of the Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland for the housing sector. And I'm not familiar with the housing sector in Ireland, and so I'm very happy to learn about it because I do believe learning from each other, from different countries, from different aspects, could be the best way to provide the sustainable architecture as we wanted to do. So the title is Affordable Aspects of Sustainable Housing, and as I mentioned in my introduction, this triggers me really because affordability and housing is very important. So thank you for coming to Denmark, coming to Copenhagen, and sharing your ideas with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Boris, for the introduction, and thanks to Velux for the kind invitation. It's my first time in Copenhagen, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So I'm bringing an Irish or a perspective from Ireland, and I'm really curious, as Boris mentioned, to hear how comparable it is to other places and what we can learn from other places. In Ireland, we don't have a shared vision of the future, and there is a tendency to believe that the closer a person lives to nature, the more sustainable their life actually is. And there is a tendency to believe that cities are the sources of pollution and a kind of a dystopian view of city life. We have a housing crisis in Ireland. We need, estimates are about 50,000 new homes per year, and that's with a population of 5 million people. And in this graph you can compare on the left multi-housing developments, which is what we've traditionally had in Ireland, which is low density suburban sprawl houses with front and back gardens. And then on the right, kind of, I suppose, where policy is taking us, which is towards compact growth and apartment delivery. So you can see across the two slides, for the first time in the history of Ireland, in 2019, the number of apartments that received planning permission exceeded the number of houses. But you can also see in pale blue that even though on the right, the number of in fact, I can probably point at that. Yeah, over here, where the number of apartments that received planning permission exceeded the number of houses for the first time in the history of Ireland, the delivery in the pale blue is actually not increasing in line with the permitted apartment schemes. So I suppose if policy is moving away from suburban sprawl, what are we going to deliver instead? And that is the challenge, that what we need to do is deliver new apartment schemes within existing neighbourhoods. And for that to work, it needs to be in a win-win manner with those existing communities. And there are some very good examples of that in Ireland. These next projects have won our award-winning schemes in Ireland. This is Percy Place, which is exemplar, living over the shop. This is Clancy Quay, which has delivered a new pedestrian quarter to the city of Dublin, and also renovated a lot of existing army barracks buildings. And this is Dunluce apartments, which are kind of villa-style apartments on Anglesey Road in Dublin. And anyone who would know that part of Dublin, this is a road of very large houses, many of them embassies, each on a large site. So this is an exemplar project of how to deliver density in an area like that, that's sympathetic to the receiving environment. And the win-win manner is particularly important in Ireland because we have very strong third-party rights. Anybody can object or appeal a planning application or decision, and anyone can delay it for up to 1.5 years and may actually stop it. So the win-win is obviously what we should be doing, but it's extra important in that context. I'm just conscious of the time, but the people who know Ireland may have noticed that those winning schemes are all in certain parts of Dublin, quite wealthy parts of Dublin, and you might ask the question why. And the answer is that suburban sprawl is actually much cheaper. It's much less. There's much less risk involved and less local opposition to in comparison to compact growth. So this slide describes why that is, that the per square metre costs of a house is lower than the per square metre costs of an apartment block. And in the case of an apartment block, you need to deliver 100 square metres of apartment building in order to get an 83 square metre apartment, whereas 100% of your building in a house is that home. And this slide is about how the closer you get to the centre of a town, city, village, the more expensive the construction is. Because houses built in green fields cost less to deliver, and they're worth more money than virtually anything else. So, you know, we talk a lot in Ireland about trying to develop over the shop, which is often kind of abandoned and run down, and to develop that into homes. That they're quite expensive projects. They tend to all be unique. You tend not to know what's going to be involved in the project until after you've started. So there's a good bit of construction risk involved in those, and very hard to scale. Conversion of historic buildings for similar reasons, they're quite expensive. There's a lot of risk involved. Often the regulation doesn't match the building very well, so there's inefficiencies. And equally, an infill site has, you know, issues like, you know, unknowns such as you might be trying to build up against other buildings. You don't know if you can use those walls from a structural perspective or a legal perspective. So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of risk, and you might have nowhere to put your site compound. So you might have the cost of renting somewhere else for that. And just to kind of run through some of those points here that I might have missed. The site costs for compact growth is much higher. They're smaller, less economies of scale. You might have to demolish existing buildings, poor site access, etc. And the building costs tend to be higher. You've got more expensive materials and circulation space to be delivered in the case of apartments. That doesn't happen for houses. You also, in Ireland, the fire protection measures are much higher for apartments than they are required in the case of houses. So the material costs are higher. And then the finance costs as well. In a case of a multi-unit housing estate, you can deliver each house one at a time and sell it. So you can phase it in a very, very cost-effective manner. Whereas with an apartment scheme, you have to deliver all of the apartments attached to a particular, say, stair and lift core before you can sell that portion of the project on. And then on the bottom right there, you can see, sorry, I don't seem to be able to go back, but I just mentioned something about tax. The tax is 5 times higher on an apartment scheme compared to a housing scheme. That's on a site of the same size, and it's just a function of the amount of dwellings that you can fit on the same site if you go for a higher density scheme over a lower density scheme. But it still doesn't really make sense. How can this be more economical? And the reason is that only some of the costs of benefits of housing are being counted in the Irish context. So we're counting the delivery costs, we're counting sales values or rental yields, and we're counting self-selected local opinion. And we're not counting all the stuff that's come up across the conference today and yesterday and will come up in the next few days. We're not counting a lot of the stuff that we say matters. For people, we're not putting a cost on the shorter commutes, better public transport facilities, potential for better placemaking and stronger communities, and the win-win potential where you bring new housing into existing neighbourhoods. Because urban designers know housing is perhaps the strongest tool in your design kit for improving urban realm. And then for the environment, infill development has minimal impact on the environment compared to new greenfield development. Agricultural land is retained for your, I suppose, food independence. I learned earlier today that soil holds more carbon than the atmosphere and trees put together, which is something I didn't know until today. So that's obviously a factor for greenfield development that doesn't have the same impact on brownfield or no impact when it comes to renovating existing buildings, and reduced dependencies on cars, of course, as well. And then for the state, making better use of existing infrastructure. The most environmentally friendly thing to do is to use what we already have: existing towns, villages, cities. Existing roads, existing cycle paths, schools, hospitals, etc., etc. So just coming to kind of some of the solutions. Solution 1 would be to measure the benefits of sustainable housing and provide incentives accordingly. So look at where this has been done well and incentivise it. If you measure all of this stuff that's not currently being counted properly, then sustainable housing can become the most affordable option. So measure the benefits of adapting existing buildings, the cultural historic value, the social value, safety and passive surveillance of bringing back buildings that are empty into use in the centre of towns or cities. And there's an example of that which has worked. No major surprise that it's in Dublin where it's been possible to deliver an adaptive reuse of a building. But if we measured all of the benefits, it should be possible everywhere. This is a study by the Smart Property Institute in Canada, which showed that in a higher density scenario, the cost to service is much lower compared to low density. And of course, if it's infill or converting existing buildings, you're going to reduce the per capita cost of servicing a particular area. And then the same study has all kinds of other elements. I don't have time to go into them today, but just one example is in Ireland, the average annual cost of running a car is €10,000. So if you're building somewhere where a family can survive with one car instead of two, or with no cars, then that's a lot of money that can be put towards rent or a mortgage. Solution 2 is implement new guidance to unlock low-rise, medium-density housing. That's happening at the moment in Ireland. When we saw that earlier graph of houses and apartments, what tends to happen is to meet density requirements, planning applications will have a mix of housing which is affordable and viable and apartments which aren't, and then what tends to happen is the houses get built and the apartments don't get built, and there's maybe a change to the planning application to replace it with houses, so we end up with suburban sprawl all over again. So this new guidance would be for kind of 2, 3, 4, 5-story apartment buildings and houses with smaller gardens and kind of stuff that sits between high-cost apartments and low sustainable housing. And then finally, solution 3 is we need to create a shared vision of how the future should look. We've had a lot of success in Ireland with the Citizens' Assembly concept, which is where 100 citizens are brought together and they're really educated in depth of a particular issue. We had it with marriage equality and abortion rights over the last number of years in Ireland. And maybe we need something similar to really start a conversation about how the future should look. Just very finally to mention a project by the Irish Cities 2070 group, which looked at Galway City, which is on the west coast of Ireland, and the top image shows the kind of footprint of the city at the moment. The second middle image shows if the population doubled under kind of a business as usual, viable, affordable manner, how that would look. And then the bottom image showed what compact growth would look, and it's well worth looking at. They have lots of very nice images of how Galway could look if it becomes this walking 20-minute neighbour, sustainable, compact city into the future. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Claire, for your short introduction in the Ireland market, and you're facing the same problems as we, the same challenge, but you're thinking and providing solutions, and I love to think and provide solutions, talking about problems. So next lecture or next speech will be given by Lars Petersen. He is the chair, he is the CEO of Velux almost for 9 months. He's not a rookie, but he is very independent from the Velux company right now. And I'm a lucky guy. I have one colleague in my team, she's Danish, and she said, Boris, Velux is completely different in Denmark than in Germany. Velux is more than a company who provides windows, for instance, or building materials. It's a company that's related to society and to the Danish people almost. And so I'm really happy to have you with us. And you make this all happen. You keep it not running. Keep it running is by Lone Pfeiffer and Eva Wiskowski. But you three are in charge of this lecture series. So thank you very much for making it happen. And thank you, Lone, as Elisabeth mentioned before, and Eva for keep this running. Great job.
Thank you, Boris. And And thank you for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. I mean, I'm delighted the UIA World Congress is here in Copenhagen, the place where I live, and I'm also delighted to be here because I've been looking forward to this, because we at Velux, together with UIE, we want to share, I think we have a common goal of fostering dialogue. As we're here today, we want to inspire each other across countries, across industries, across different providers in order to find better solutions. And we do that through our Impact Partner Program. But, our sector, I think you heard it already, it's pivotal, the building sector, because we are 1/3 of a carbon footprint of the world, right? 1/3. So unless we bend the curve down like Sinus showed before, there's no way the world will make it. So we need to move in the building industry. And it's actually becoming more and more evident that the biodiversity is linked to climate change. Half of the species of the world has disappeared during my lifetime, right? So it leaves us all with a great task of finding ways to solving the climate change. But we believe at Velux, at the same time, as Sinus have shown in this beautiful example today, we can also solve other issues while we are solving the climate crisis. So we can unleash better health, better well-being as an example. Because today, data commission for Velux, so it's real data, scientific data, Elizabeth, in Europe shows that 1/3 of Europeans have a health hazard in the way they live, right? 1/3. And I have no reason to believe it would be very different for the rest of the world. We just don't have that data. So that shouldn't be acceptable to anyone. So we have a climate crisis and we have a health issue, actually, the way we live. So I will not bore you with 100 slides. Don't worry, guys. I have just some beautiful pictures. Because in Velux, we have ambition to be a front runner for the sustainable development of the building industry, right? We are not alone. There are other companies, of course, we partner with them, but we really want to lead the way. Because it's becoming evident, I think, to all of us that we need to accelerate. We have a problem to solve. We need to solve it between engineers, sorry guys, I'm not an architect, and architects, and business women and businessmen, of course, in order to get there. So, how do we do that? Well, in Velux we do it by having our own house in order, obviously, reducing the CO2 emissions from our own operations, but also from our value chain. 98.6% of our carbon footprint comes from the scope 3. So it's upstream, right? So we need to work together with our suppliers, which we do. We form partnerships in order to reduce the carbon footprint of our solutions. And this starkly underlines that we cannot solve the challenges unless we collaborate. So Velux cannot solve it alone, but we can maybe be a part of it. We can be a catalyst. We can show the way together with others. I was actually recently at this nice conference here, at the IAA, so IEA, Global Energy and Efficiency Conference in Versailles. And the biggest one ever, actually. We gathered more people, we gathered more ministers. I don't know if you recognize anyone from your country, but a lot of ministers, a lot of CEOs. And it's great news, actually, because the energy efficiency cause is gaining momentum from a political perspective, but also from a business perspective. Because we need momentum. We are behind. We need to save 3 times more energy in the coming decade compared to the decade we've passed. That is the conclusion of this seminar, not mine personal. And we need to increase the European energy retrofit, the speed at which we renovate from an energy perspective our buildings in Europe by 6 times, from 0.5% to 3%. That was the conclusion of the meeting. But for that to happen, the people who are here today at this conference, but here in the room, you are essential. You can all be part of that solution. Because between us, we have a know-how, we have the products, we have the will to design healthy and high-performing buildings. So how do we leverage that to make sure we reach the target of a Paris Agreement? Well, I think you heard a lot about this from Sinus, so I might, be slightly repetitive. I try to avoid it, but we have recently shared an experiment showcasing how we can reduce the carbon footprint of buildings. So 3 years ago, we invited ArchDaily engineers with a question: how much can you reduce the carbon footprint of a home while ensuring an optimal indoor climate? And after the concept development phase, there were building contractors, Enemark and Pedersen. So it was all, a collaboration between strong parties. And in April, we opened it up. And it's been all over the press, and it feels great to be there. And I really hope some of you will be able to join us today or the days to come, because it's a very, very nice place. And thank you, Sinus, for creating that together with the others. It is, of course, 3 times lower carbon footprint than the average Danish house. But it's also very, very livable. My wife's told me when we went there with our dog, it's only me. We're empty nesters, so only me and the dog and Annika, and she said, why don't we get a house like this, right? And that's a feeling also, Sustainable houses should not feel like a burden to anyone. It should be a place where you want to live, right? So 3.8 kilos CO2 per square meter per year, using existing technologies. Affordable house, right? That's the way to go. So, Living Places Copenhagen is an example that showcase that we can build sustainable, healthy homes, but we need to change how we think about buildings and by how we approach the building process. I think the key, you told me, Sinus, at least, the key is that we gave you time to think this through, right? I guess any of you architects, many of you architects, according to you, Sinus, could have designed this if you were given the time. But often the building owner, there's a time constraint, so we stress you. Or the only iteration is on the economy, not on the CO2 footprint. Here we allowed for time for that iteration to happen, that creativity to happen, which, and then of course a collaboration between the different parties. This is a bit of open source. I don't know if that exists in the building environment, but I would like to call it that. This design is available. There are some agreements we need to do. You need to stay true to the concept, so to speak. We would love you to use our products, but you can basically steal with pride the knowledge created here and reiterate it in your city or your place, because we want to spread the knowledge how to build sustainable. And of course, every city is different, every country is different, so you would have to adapt it to your local conditions. The project has been really well received. I mean, also beyond our circles, we walk around in our circles, of course, in the building environment, but the political environment has shown great interest, the cultural environment, the journalists have shown. So we've seen ambassadors from all kind of key corners of the world, and from the European Parliament have shown interest. So it's essential, because to really accelerate the green transition, we as practitioners, as industry, need to lead the way, showing what is possible. But we also need the policymakers who define the regulatory framework. And that is not that easy for them either. They're on our side, but there's also politicians out there. So whatever you can do to have an impact on that agenda, please work for your local community, because the policymakers also need support, actually. Because right now at EU level, these members are negotiating the energy performance of buildings director, a key piece of legislation. Might sound boring, EU legislation, why should we care about that? But we need to move the legislation in order to have a right energy performance, carbon emission, renovation, uptake. So, sorry for being a bit politician there. But I think seeing a project such as Living Places hopefully shows that it is possible to set ambitious targets as the industry. We are able to deliver, we want to deliver. So it's also an invitation to politicians to put the bar high. And maybe just a small side comment, but right now we're also working on the option to put Living Places in Ukraine, one of the cities of Ukraine, because there are others who want to do it too. We want to do it, and we need to help rebuild Ukraine. So let's see if we can't make that happen. But more in general, wherever you're based, let's drive the development of our future living places together. We can achieve so much on a global scale by partnering up, by sharing knowledge openly, and working across different disciplines of the building industry. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
So stay on stage, Lars, and I would love to invite all the speakers coming up to stage again for our panel discussion. Please join us. You can choose every place without this one, except this one, because I would love to see all your faces to improve if my question is too boring. Lars, first, why do you do this? You are a producer of a single component of the building component, and why do you spending so much resources, time, and all these kinds of things, of money as well, in a project like Living Places? What is the impact for you?
I mean, we have a saying in Velux, which comes from our founder, who started a company during the Second World War, but one trial is better than 1,000 expert opinions. I think we can all get tired of expert opinions sometimes. It's better to do a trial. So we wanted to try this. We wanted to give the right people the chance to try it. It's also a fact we can, right, and we want. We have 1965, our founder said the model company objective, where we want to be useful to society. It's part of who we are. Every company has a purpose these days, but you know, we're coming from that in 1965. So it's also our nature to try to move society. So there's been other numerous examples of this, but I think this is the best one, to be honest, because it is very, very attractive also. And but maybe it always feels like that. The last one is the best one. But the short answer is we want to show it's possible, and we can contribute to society by showing what's possible.
Okay. As I follow your lecture, Sinus, I didn't know these slides, the last slide we are seeing on the screen, and I wonder if it could be a role model, or if you could translate these ideas to multi-story houses or to more dense situations in cities. And now we see this dense situation. I don't know if you are the designer for this, but what we have to do to transfer these single houses to an urban situation, a more dense situation?
It's absolutely possible, because all the principles developed for the single family homes that you saw as the built prototype